is able to join us, but he's not well, so he won't be making his presentation. I'm a bit disappointed at that, as I was expecting some mind-expanding commentary on how our monetary system limits our consciousness and our ability to share. So, if any of you have any questions for Jeffrey Eisen, who's he works in psychonoetics. He's an enlightenment therapist, author, and educator. But what we could do while we're getting this presentation uploaded, we could find him on Skype and relay a question to him. Is there anyone who knows the work of Jeffrey Eisen and has a question for him while we get the other presentation loaded? I've had an update on the Eisen situation. His wife has said that she will present his presentation. And then we will have well, at the end, hopefully we'll have time to put questions to Dr. Eisen himself. So, as we bring up his wife, whose name I don't have as yet, on Skype or Adobe, just to set the context, there's a Chilean economist called Manfred Max Neef, who calculated recently that since 2008, the world has managed to mobilize about 17 trillion US dollars equivalent to bail out the banks. Now, he worked out that that was enough money to feed the starving people of our world for the next 500 years. So this gives us a bit of a sense of how the socio-economic system shapes what we feel we're able to afford. So maybe we'll get some thoughts on this and a reminder of the fundamental importance of what we're discussing here these days. So, hello, I don't know, I haven't had the pleasure. Jean de Rousseau, is that your name? Okay, Jeff Eisen's wife, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fantastic, and we can hear you. And your name is Jeannie, is that right?
It is.
Well, thank you for standing in. We're a bit behind schedule, so if it's possible to share the key ideas within 10 minutes time, that would be, within 10 minutes would be fantastic. If you need 15, that's also okay.
Oh my.
Yes.
Well, we have a presentation of about 25 minutes.
Okay, well, if possible, if you could sort of get through that in slightly quicker time, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
I'll see what I can do. So you must already know that Jeff will be joining us for questions and answers after the presentation, and I hope there will be some time for that. Jeff wants me to let you know that he's not an economist, but rather a psychologist studying the role of socioeconomic systems and how they affect human consciousness and vice versa. As you see, the title of the presentation is Humanomics, and we're talking about moving from an energy-backed currency to a consciousness-backed culture through redefining profit. Excuse me. So Jeff's presentation today will focus on the key roles of the concept of profit and the role that it plays in the current global economic crisis. He is proposing a radical redefinition of profit, one that operates synergistically with a currency backed by renewable and sustainable energy, and one that will move business in a direction to reverse disastrous effects of the global crisis today, as well as redirect human consciousness. We begin by introducing the concepts of scarcity consciousness and abundance consciousness. Since all fossil fuels are in diminishing supply, they encourage a consciousness of scarcity, whereas the development of alternative sources of energy enriches humanity makes a positive contribution to the ecology of the whole earth, and leads us toward abundance consciousness. Secondly, we're noting that we're living through a time when every proposal, innovation, and initiative for reform is ultimately weakened, if not totally defeated, on the economic level. As we heard also from Hazel Henderson yesterday, the only way to get out of this bind is to move from a scarcity-based economy to an abundance-based economy. When we abandon the limitations of fiat currency and the gold standard, and even non-renewable fossil fuels, we move away from an economy founded on scarcity consciousness. When we back our currency with renewable energy, we move toward an abundance-based economy, from units of scarcity to units of abundance. With this sense of direction, let us now turn toward our focus of profit and examine how we currently define profit through a little invention called double-entry bookkeeping. How double-entry bookkeeping inevitably depletes both human and environmental resources, and how this deplorable situation could be easily reversed. How? By making it more profitable to contribute to humanity and the earth than it is to consume and pillage them. Capitalism and the corporate culture have become more and more destructive to both the quality of human consciousness and the quality of our ecosystems. Not intentionally, of course, for capitalism is just about making a profit, and the corporations which populate capitalism are profit-generating organisms. In this, corporations are not very different from biological organisms. All living systems have to operate at a profit, that is, increase their energy and substance as well in order to survive. Similarly, living systems survive, increase, and propagate by consuming the resources of their environment and successfully competing with other living systems for the same resources. And finally, like some corporations, living systems not only consume resources, but transform them, thus adding value. However, most living systems, from bacteria to rainforests, with the exception of those created by industrial man, ultimately create and put back more resources than they consume, with the ultimate return being the decomposition of their own bodies. For the most part, organisms are not only ecologically neutral, contributing as much as they consume, but ecologically positive, contributing more than they consume. Recently, however, industrial man has reversed this process, consuming far more than he contributes, creating mountains, rivers, and clouds of unusable and toxic waste, and threatening the very ecosystems that support him. So much so that in less than a century, a mere instant in the lifespan of the planet, the natural balance has begun to be destabilized, and we are teetering on the brink of unprecedented scarcity in such basics as uncontaminated water, food, fossil fuels, and clean air. All life is ecologically positive, but capitalism and industrialism tend to be ecologically negative. Returning to a consideration of consciousness here, there are many proposals on how to fix the consciousness of capitalism and the corporate system. But most are looking to either elevate the consciousness of management with the idea that an increase there would trickle down the ladder of corporate practices, or elevate the consciousness of consumers with the idea that informed buying would influence corporate practices from the bottom up. Despite the considerable merits of these initiatives, I fear they are doomed to only a moderate success, so long as the way that the corporations profit does not reflect their consumption of resources, both natural and human. My answer is to redefine profitability itself, and to thus encourage the move in consciousness from narrow self-interest to enlightened self-interest. Right now, the way in which corporations figure the ratio of profit to loss is basically double-entry bookkeeping. One column is for inflow, the income derived from selling goods, services, and the like. The other is for outflow, the cumulative cost of doing business. If the sum of column 1 exceeds the sum of column 2, the corporation is profitable and viable. If not, it eventually goes bankrupt. No other considerations whatsoever really count. If the bottom line is negative, the corporation is not profitable. End of story. Every other consideration, consumption, pollution, fairness, social consequences, aesthetics, ecological devastation, etc., is reduced to profit or loss. This means that in the final analysis, every consideration has to favorably influence the bottom line. This, as far as it goes, is the way it has to be, even the way it should be. Corporations are subject to approximately the same energy economics as living systems. They have to make a profit or at least not operate at a loss in order to survive. The problem, though, is not that corporations operate for a profit. It's that the present economic system and not reality defines the profit. Another way of saying this is that only the corporation makes the profit, not humanity and the global ecology. That is, the human sphere. As a matter of fact, corporations regularly profit at the expense of the human sphere, consuming or destroying a large part of the global system in order to eke out a relatively minor profit for themselves. A corporation can destroy an ecosystem, pollute a river, and impoverish an indigenous culture, but if it makes a monetary profit, if it costs less to destroy part of the world than the income such destruction engenders, the corporation is deemed profitable, and the investors realize a comfortable return on their investment. This is not a real profit. That is not a profitable corporation, but a subsidized one that operates at a substantial loss. By who is it subsidized? By the countries that house it, by the ecosystems of the globe, by you and I, and by every person who walks or will walk the earth. It is clear that we have to build accountability and responsibility into corporate consciousness, but the question remains how to do that. I believe that the most useful way to do it is to redefine profitability. We have to hold corporations accountable for the real costs of their doing business, fully responsible for the consumption and the destruction they cause, and to require that they pay for the real costs of correcting it. In this context, a profitable bottom line would still be a surplus of income over expenditure, but the expenditure would include a monetization of the consumption and or destruction of human and natural resources, and the income would be balanced by the need to pay compensation for the restoration of the human and natural resources. What I would propose would be changing from double entry to quadruple entry bookkeeping, adding a column on one side for system contribution and a column on the other side for system consumption or depletion. In this way, one could keep track of whether the corporation, viewed as a part of the total system of humanity and the earth which supports it, that is the human sphere, was really operating at a profit or a loss. And if not, one could calculate to what extent the corporation is withdrawing from the common property of all the sentient beings on earth. Corporations then would be taxed for the real costs of cleaning up the environment, replenishing resources, and as if it is possible, reversing human suffering and the degradation of everyday life. But also, they would be rewarded for any contributions to the Commonwealth. Overseeing this process would be a quasi-governmental function on a global level. I can imagine a sort of global IRS or ERS, External Revenue Service, which would further tax corporations which are system negative, reduce taxation and or credit and reward corporations which are system positive, and neither tax nor reward corporations which are system neutral. Within this framework of two-way taxation, corporations would not be taxed solely on the basis of traditional profitability, but also on the net loss or gain to the social and ecological system. Profitability then would be redefined from a net monetary gain without regard to the whole system to a net monetary gain balanced by its impact on the system. A system positive corporation would be proportionally rewarded, and a system negative corporation would be proportionally taxed. With this arrangement, it would even be possible for a corporation to turn a profit when it was running at a monetary loss, and conversely, for a corporation to operate at a loss, even though profitable in monetary terms. This alone, without necessitating any other changes whatsoever, would lead corporate energies in new and positive directions. Marxism failed by not taking into account two aspects of human nature, individual self-interest and the survival drive. Margaret Thatcher was of the opinion that due to the same considerations of human nature, there were no viable alternatives to capitalism. However, by redefining profitability, you neither have to change human nature nor abandon capitalism. Profitability can be redefined by extending its beneficiaries from the individual or corporate self, as well as other collectives of separate selves like family, religion, nation, to the whole human sphere. This redefinition takes advantage of human nature and redirects it to benefit the world rather than plunder it. This is the concept of enlightened self-interest expressed on the corporate level. If we define what it is to be profitable, neither narrow self-interest, the survival drive, nor the drive to corporate profitability would have to be changed. Let's consider how such a redefinition might affect the whole system. As corporations find it more profitable to conserve and restore rather than to consume and destroy, we can expect an increase in corporate altruism and both ecological and humanitarian awareness. And this is why, because these qualities will have become economically advantageous.
I, for one, endorse that. Jeannie, thank you very much for presenting and stepping in this way. We only actually have an hour left in this session, and we've got two presentations which are actually over 35 minutes each. So I'm going to have to call it to a halt there. Would the organisers be able to confirm that we'll be able to see this presentation online, so we can see the rest of the slides? You'll be able to send it in, I think? Yeah, I'm getting some nods in the audience. Also, just to give you a sense of how people are responding in the audience, you've made the proposition that the profit motive of corporations as currently constituted is harming society and the environment. Who here agrees with that proposition in the audience today? We're with you, Jeannie, and we're with you, Jeffrey. So hopefully, Jeffrey, you'll be with us in probably 55 minutes' time when we can take some questions. So maybe rest up and we'll hear from you in 55 minutes. Thank you very much, Jeannie, and please also do stay with us. Our next presentation is from Professor Mark T. Brown. He's Professor in Environmental Engineering Sciences and directs the programs in Systems Ecology and Ecological Engineering. And he's done research in ecological economics as well. And what I'm really interested to hear is also to get a sense of Mark's journey, because he's someone who has this great knowledge of environmental systems and has come to an awareness of the need to work on monetary reform and alternative money systems and so on. So I think that's a journey that many of us have been taking. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Mark.
Thank you very much. I would like to use the Mac because I have a couple of animations that I'm sure will not translate. Of course,
Okay, while we wait for this, could we have any questions for Jeannie or Jeffrey in, I think they're in Florida? Yes, so could someone be doing the question? Hello, ladies with microphones or guys with microphones? Yeah. Oh, wow, okay, well, one question, but you've turned her off.
Just a quick
Yes.
question. Just curious, how is this quadruple entry accounting any different from triple bottom line accounting?
Okay, well, we don't have her online anymore, is that what's happening? Well, with that, I don't want to do all that logging in stuff. Well, if we can't hear her, come. Ah, yeah, okay. So, Jeannie, did you hear that question? And Jeffrey, hello, good to see you.
The truth is, I don't know. I'm not going to be economist, and I don't really know.
Okay, well, that's something maybe we could work on when we read your paper, and maybe our friend here in the audience will contact you with his ideas. And also we might chat about it afterwards. Okay, so without further ado, as that technological problem is not such a problem, how do we bring up your presentation? Mr. IT Man?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the organizers for inviting us to arrive. I'd also like to acknowledge my co-author, Sergio Giatti, back in the room back there. It's a terrible thing, in many respects, to go as the last or second to last speaker, because I've changed this talk about 50 times since the beginning of this conference, but that's the way it goes. Okay, so I took the theme of this conference very seriously, and we're going to talk about energy currency and energy as the fundamental measure. What happened to the cost and value? The organization, I'm going to talk a little bit about systems of value, and then a brief overview of Emergy accounting, that's spelled with an M, and then Emergy and GDP, national accounts, Emergy and trade, and Emergy and debt. And most of the data that I'll be showing you is for nations, but the concepts that I am going to explain here are equally applicable to regions, states, even cities, municipalities. So value is the worth of a good or service as determined by the market. In neoclassical economics, the value of an object or service is often seen as the price it would bring in an open and competitive market. There are two systems of value in reality. There is a donor value, that is, the more I put into something, the more valuable it is. And then there's the receiver system of value, utility. The more it's worth to me, the more valuable it is. And we carry both of those value systems around in our brains. We all know that the more you put into your child, the better off they're prepared for life. The more you put into that manuscript you're writing, the better it'll be received and eventually published. We also, whenever we go to the store, to the grocery store or to the market, we're interested in playing off one thing from the other and deciding which one is better for us, that receiver system. So we carry both of those. Emergy is a donor system of value. It says what it takes to make something determines its value. And that's not anything new. Of course, our good friend Adam Smith said that value of something is what goes into making it, the costs of the factors of production. And so there's a whole branch of economics that talks about and deals with determining value based on the factors of production. So I'm an ecologist and an ecosystem. The factors of production, sun and sun and wind and rain and run-in and geologic processes and even organisms that move in and out. This is a system diagram of a very simple ecosystem with production here and then a chain of animals and consumption. So if I were to try and do the Emergy values, I would need to be able to turn these factors of production into some units that I could then add together in order to determine the total cost of producing that ecosystem. Well, the same is true for a human system and an economy. The factors of production are sun, wind, rain, and CO2, and all of those things, as well as resources like fossil fuels and minerals and topsoil and groundwater and goods and services. And the real trick here is to be able to put all of those factors of production into a common framework in order to be able to add them together. Well, economics sort of does that. The old utility theory of value says, well, there's prices for all that. I can put a price on top of it, I can put a price on groundwater, and goods and services and so forth. But the trick here is that that's what it's worth to a human. That's not what it's worth to the biosphere or to the system as a whole. And so what we're going to try to do is to put some values on those factors of production. So, you've all had an economics course probably somewhere, and that's the first thing they show you in an economics class, that what an economy is production and consumption, and there goes the money round and round and round. But there's a real problem with that. They're lying. What is actually happening here, it's working, is that there is money going round and round, absolutely, but there's something else going in round and countercurrent. There is labor, and there are goods and services. And almost every economics textbook that I've ever looked at leaves those two flows out. Sorry, I don't talk loud enough? Sorry. So they leave those two flows out and only talk about the flow of money. Now, a really interesting thing happened to me about 25 years ago when I first saw that diagram. I realized that money and resources go in opposite directions. I give you money, you give me food. I give you money, you give me fuel. I give you money, you give me labor. They go in opposite directions. And I started thinking about what's economics? It's looking at the money. There goes the resources. They're looking at the world backwards. Value is the resource. That's what drives the economy, not the money. The money is just what is being paid for the resource that drives the economy. All right, well, this isn't complete yet either. We need to have those factors of production. That's what's driving that circulation of stuff. We've got renewable resources here, and we've got a whole bunch of non-renewables. And that's driving production, and that makes goods available, and then those goods make labor available, and we've got a circulation of money. But we're still not quite done. In reality, there's a government out there, and it's another sector of the economy. And again, you have these closed loops of money in all of these cases. And if you look, every one of these is a closed loop. And so there's purchases by government, and then people pay taxes for the control that government provides, etc. But we're still not done. In reality, there's this new sector of the economy, the financial sector. And following on Schumacher's idea of a primary economy and a secondary economy, you all know that he said the primary economy was the environment, was the ecology. The secondary economy was industry and agriculture that was converting the primary economy into products for humans. Well, I suggest that there is a tertiary economy, and it's made up out here of the financial things that the bonds and derivatives and all of that. And I looked at the U.S. economy, and if you look at the primary economy and include forestry and fisheries and the like, this is just in terms of money now. The primary economy provides about 3% of the total GDP. The secondary economy provides about 32%. Government provides about 14%. And the tertiary economy provides about 53% right now. That's all paper that does not really have any resources associated with it. And so here we have what's happening to the U.S. economy. Here's the secondary economy declining. This is percent of the gross domestic product. And there's the tertiary economy taking off over the last 50, 60 years or so from 1947. It was a big problem. That's another talk, but I just want to point that out. Okay, so what is energy or emergy? We all know that energy is the ability to cause work, and we measure it in BTUs and joules and calories because we can convert all energy into heat. But it's really a misnomer and a real problem because energy comes in many forms: sunlight, wind, geopotential energy of elevated water, fuel, electricity, and so forth. And they're not the same stuff. Energy is not energy. Is not energy. Is not energy. In other words, a calorie is not a calorie is not a calorie. If it was, while we were in here eating lunch downstairs, you all, instead of eating that lunch, you could have gone out on the lawn out there and laid there and opened your mouth and swallowed some sunlight, and you would have swallowed in that short period of time as many calories as you consumed downstairs. It won't work. By the same token, you can't run your car on solar energy unless you have a major converter. Several hectares of land that convert that sunlight into ethanol. So 1 calorie of sunlight is not equivalent to 1 calorie of ethanol or of human work. And in fact, so I'll get there in a moment. So we have this concept then that evolved from this realization that energy has a quality to it. It has to do with its concentration and with its convertibility, flexibility, and so forth. And thus is born the term energy. Now we called it a long time energy quality. And over the years, we realized we needed a term, and energy is the one that evolved. And it is the available energy of one type required directly and indirectly to make something. So again, remember, it's a donor system of value, so it's what goes into making something. That's the number one thing. And the second thing is that we express it in the same form of energy. And we usually use solar, but you can use you could use coal energy if you wanted, or even oil energy. But we use solar. Take it back to the basics. So it's sometimes thought of as the memory of energy that is used in the past, similar to embodied energy. The units that we use are solar energy joules, and we often abbreviate those as SEJs. So the units of energy, as I said, are solar M-joules. So here's an ecological food web. It actually happens to be an estuary. You see all those organisms, and there's energy flow that moves through that. Now, the interesting thing about food webs is that as the energy is passed from one component to the next, there's less and less energy along the way because of the second law. A bunch of it just goes down the heat sink and is not available to the system. So you can take a food web like that and convert it into an energy chain. The producers, the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, and the tertiary consumers. And you can say, okay, what's the total energy driving this system in equivalence of sunlight? And it's 1 million joules per day. And of that million, only 1,000 joules get passed to the primary consumers. The rest, the rest is lost in heat. And of that 1,000, only 100 get passed to secondary consumers. This is a 10% efficiency, and on down until you wind up with only 1. And that's the basis of energy. It says it takes 1 million solar M-joules to produce 1 joule of this, of tertiary consumer. And it takes 1 million to produce 10 of the secondary consumer. All well and good. Here's the human industrial society, techno-society, a food web of sorts, all of the energy that's required. And here it is as a chain. So it takes 20 million direct and indirect solar energy to produce 1 unit of human labor. So 1 unit of human labor is worth 20 million solar M-joules. And that's the way you can now compare across. So it takes 20 million to produce 500 of coal, and 20 million to produce 100 electricity. So here are some solar transformities. These are the relationships between sunlight, which we take as one, and the other energy. So electricity, electricity is equivalent to 550,000 joules of sunlight. Or to put it the other way, in order to have an equivalence, you have to have 550,000 joules of sunlight to equal 1 joule of work, of the work potential of electricity. Now that varies. It depends on the plant that you're using, the power plant that you're using. And so the others here, about 150,000 joules of sunlight of oil. 150,000 joules of sunlight to make 1 joule of oil. So when somebody says there is enough sunlight falling on 1 square kilometer of the Earth's surface to supply the energy needs of Croatia for the next 10 years, they have forgotten about quality. There is not enough energy on 1 square kilometer of the Earth's surface. In fact, if you take all of the sunlight falling on the entire planet Earth, it will supply 6% of the total energy demand of humanity on a time basis. Only 6%. So there's no way we're going to supply enough energy from sunlight to support this system that we have with these wonderful lights and projectors and on and on and on. Okay, so a resource-based currency must account for all resource inputs, not just electricity or one form of energy. Here's an example. Here's Croatia. This is what I call an energy signature, or an energy signature. And it shows the renewable... It shows the renewable portion. These are a gigasolar M-joules per meter square per year, just to put it on a basis. The renewable portion, the forestry and fisheries that are consumed, fossil fuels that are used that are indigenous, and minerals and metals, and then these are the imports. Okay, so that's Croatia. This is the United States. Notice the difference just in the magnitude here. There's an order of magnitude difference in the scale, but that's not important. The bars, we don't have nearly as much renewable as compared to fossil fuels, and we don't import very much. And I just came back from Costa Rica. Well, there's the two sort of comparative and see. And so if we're going to have an energy basis for a currency, we need to include all of the factors of production, not just electricity or fossil fuels or whatever. And here's Costa Rica. Costa Rica is running on the majority of their energy is renewable. They've got wonderful rivers and dams and so forth. And so if you only look at electricity, for instance, what happens is you shortchange the developing and undeveloped countries. This is a graph of normalized fuel use. I used fuel. I could have used electricity. It would even be worse if we used electricity. So if fuel predicted total energy use, they would all line up right along that line. Every one of them would. These are the developing and undeveloped economies of the world. These are the developed ones. They all line up. So once you become overly developed, fuel use and total energy use begin to be very similar. Okay, so an economy. How much time have I got? 15 more? That's great. Okay, here's our economy again. Money going round and round on the inside, being driven by energy inputs from the outside. This happens to be the U.S. economy, and we have about 23 times 10 to the 20, 2.3 times 10 to the 25th solar M-joules per year driving the economy. And the GDP is about 9.8 times 10 to the 12th dollars. And so we can do a relationship between energy and dollars, and we can express that as the what I call the M dollar value, 2.3 times 10 to the 12th solar M-joules per dollar. So for every dollar in the economy that is circulating, it takes 2.3 times 10 to the 12th solar M-joules of energy. Now we've got a wonderful way then of comparing dollars and going back and forth between dollars and energy. So that's what I just said. It is not constant, it changes. If we look here, in the year 2000, that value was 3 times 10 to the 12th. In 2004, it was 2.4 times 10 to the 12th. And now, today, in 2008, which is the last year for which we have data, it's about 2.3. And in fact, it's been going downhill ever since. That's inflation, is all it is. If the amount of money that is chasing the energy rises faster than the energy does, that's inflation. And so what you're looking at is an inflation graph for the U.S. economy. All right, so here's a bunch of countries, and we have a data set for all of the countries of the world in the Center for Environmental Policy. And I'll be happy to give you the URL for that. Anybody can download that data and have a look at the energy that is driving every economy in the world. And here, over here on the very end, this is the renewable inputs to each economy. I don't have all of them here, I've only grabbed a bunch. And then the non-renewable inputs and their gross domestic product. And so here's that energy to money ratio for each one. Here sits the United States, that 2.3. Notice that the only country in the world that has a lower one is Japan. But also notice that as we go down, these numbers get big. Now, the first time I did this, I thought, wait a minute, this is crazy. I must have done something wrong. Because it says that the U.S. has the lowest energy per dollar. And we're always the best, right? We're always the biggest, but we're the lowest. And then I started thinking, but what does that mean? That means if I take my dollar, 2.3 times 10 to the 12th, and I go to Mali, divide 38 by 2.3, what do you get? 16? I have an advantage of 16 to 1. At home, my dollar only buys 2.3 times 10 to the 12th. But if I take that dollar to Mali, it buys 38 times 10 to the 12th. About 16 times as much. That's why we love to go to undeveloped countries and take our money there and vacate, right? You get a lot more for your money because there's more energy in their economy per dollar that is circulating, per currency. Well, that's all well and good. That then will bear in just a moment on tourism as well as trade. The other thing, here's all of the countries of the world aligned. Here's the developed economies. Down here, the U.S. and Italy and Europe. Here are the developing, and then here are, I call them the underdeveloped, and I understand that that's not PC, but here's all of the underdeveloped. And notice, so when I take my buck and I go, my dollar, and I go to those countries, I bring back a lot for my money. Okay, here's trade. This happens to be between the U.S. and my colleague's country, Italy. And if we just trade dollar for dollar, and I'm assuming that we're both getting an average basket of goods, that means that my dollar can be expressed by the 2.3 times 10 to 12. It turns out that because Italy's is higher, Italy loses on every trade, dollar for dollar, everything being equal, by about 2 to 1. So I have a trade advantage with Italy of about 2 to 1. Well, my students, they saw through that right away. And the first thing they said to me was, well, we don't have a normal basket of goods. No, we trade actual goods. And so here's trading phosphate from country A for corn from country B. And there's $10 circulating. And I just did that because a bushel of corn is actually about $7 on the market, but 10 is easier to divide by, so I just made it $10. It could have been $1. And the interesting thing is that phosphate has huge